kind girl rescues old lady on flight, billion overseas, and can't look away. It began with a sandwich, just one. A girl gave it away to a trembling woman at the airport, a stranger with silver hair and hands that shook when she reached for kindness. And in that moment, the world shifted. Not because of the cameras or the collapse that followed, but because that stranger whispered a single sentence before the medics arrived. "If I don't make it, marry my grandson." The girl laughed. But 3 hours later, a man with storm gray eyes walked into the hospital room. Elf looked at her, then at the ring on her finger, and said, "You're wearing my grandmother's promise, the girl with the sandwich." Atlanta International Airport, and 42. I.M. Gate C-17. Jenna Cross didn't mean to be late. She didn't mean to miss breakfast either. But things had a way of unraveling around her, quietly, softly, until you didn't notice the seams were splitting until they were wide open. It was her third attempt at applying to Apex Aviation's elite flight attendant program. Third, not because she lacked the grades or the experience, but because every time she stood in front of those interviewers, her voice shook like a paper in the wind. She'd spent the night memorizing safety procedures, practiced her smile in the bathroom mirror, even braided her long chestnut hair into something sleek and airline-worthy. But now, her stomach growled as she clutched her folder of credentials, wandering through the humming terminal, scanning for something, anything, edible. She found it, a turkey sandwich in a plastic box, overpriced and sad-looking, but sturdy. She held it like it was a lifeline. Then she heard it. Sharp, shrill, not the boarding call, something else. "Ma'am, if you can't pay, you need to move aside." Jenna turned her head toward the commotion. A small crowd had gathered around a corner kiosk. There, at the center of it, was a frail, silver-haired woman in a navy church coat and worn shoes. Her fingers trembled around a plastic cup of tea. Her eyes blinked fast, bewildered. "I thought my grandson would meet me," the woman whispered. The young clerk rolled her eyes. "This is a prepay line. No cash, no card, no tea." People were watching. No one was helping. Jenna stepped forward without thinking. It was instinct, the kind her grandmother taught her in the kitchen on stormy Georgia mornings. "Here," Jenna said softly, placing her sandwich on the counter. "And the tea." "I'll cover it." The woman looked up at her, her eyes watery blue and full of something that felt like both gratitude and grief. "You didn't have to do that," the old woman murmured, her fingers brushing Jenna's as she took the sandwich. "I know," Jenna smiled. "That's why it matters." They sat together on the empty bench by the window, watching planes take off into the silver sky. The woman nibbled slowly, as if she hadn't eaten properly in days. "What's your name, dear?" the woman asked after a while. "Jenna Cross." "You?" "Esther Ward." The name meant nothing to Jenna. Just an ordinary name from an ordinary woman. Esther asked questions, little ones. Was Jenna nervous? Where was she applying? Did she like flying? Jenna told her everything. She didn't know why. Maybe because the woman listened like she was memorizing each word. Then Esther gripped her hand and whispered, "I may not make it through today. My heart isn't what it used to be. If I don't, will you marry my grandson?" Jenna blinked. "What?" Cold, rigid, like his father. "But he's good. He just forgot how to show it." Jenna chuckled uneasily. "You're joking, right?" But Esther didn't laugh. Her fingers squeezed hers one more time. And then, just like that, she collapsed. Everything turned into sirens. Paramedics, oxygen tanks, people calling out codes Jenna couldn't understand. And in the chaos, one nurse, trying to identify next of kin, opened Esther's clutch and found a ring, gold with a sapphire in the center, vintage, heavy, meaningful. "Give this to the girl," she whispered to the nurse as they wheeled her away. "She's my answer." The ring was placed in Jenna's hand as if it were nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was the beginning of everything. 3 hours later, Jenna found herself in a private hospital suite, her interview forgotten, her blouse stained with tea, her life upside down. A man stepped in, broad-shouldered navy wool coat, storm-colored eyes. He looked like a magazine ad for cologne, except colder. He stared at her hand, at the ring, and then at her. "You're wearing my grandmother's promise," he said, his voice like steel wrapped in velvet. Jenna opened her mouth, unsure whether to explain or to run. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. "I'm sure you didn't," he said flatly. She blinked, unsure what to say next. "Let's make something clear, Miss Cross," he said slowly. "My grandmother isn't dying. She's persuasive?" Jenna stared. "You mean?" "She faked the collapse, or dramatized it. She does that sometimes." He crossed his arms. "She's the only person I know who could stage a proposal at an airport and turn it into a marriage contract." Jenna's pulse pounded. "Wait, there's no actual contract, right?" The man lifted a folder and tossed it onto the side table. Signed, dated, filed. Emergency marriage license. Esther Ward's dying wish. "I'm Grayson Ward," he said, "DO of Apex Aviation." And then he added with a smirk that was more sad than amused, "Congratulations, you're the new Mrs. Ward." Chapter 1. A Wife by Accident. The walls of the hospital suite were far too white for comfort, the kind of white that made you feel small, like you didn't belong there. Jenna sat stiffly on the edge of the armchair, the ring still loose on her finger. The sapphire caught the light, throwing blue shards across her lap like broken glass. She'd tried 3 times to pull it off. It wouldn't budge. "You're quiet," Grayson Ward said, pacing near the window with his back to her. "That's unusual for people who chase headlines." "I'm not chasing anything," Jenna said, her voice hoarse. "I didn't know who she was. I was just trying to help." He turned slowly. His gray eyes flicked over her face, her rain-damp hair, her scuffed shoes. "You helped her," he said flatly, "and now you're my wife." Jenna flinched. "On paper, temporarily." Grayson raised a brow. "Temporarily, huh?" She stood, her hands clenched. "You're the one with all the power. Undo it." He stepped toward her, slow and calculated, like a man who measured every movement by how much space it would steal from someone else. "If I undo it now, the board will think I'm unstable. The press will spin it as me abandoning a sick woman's final request." Jenna's voice shook. "So, what are you saying?" "I'm saying," he said, holding her gaze, "you and I are going to play along, at least until she's out of surgery. A week, 2, maybe." She stared at him, stunned. "You want me to fake a marriage with you?" His voice didn't waver. "You already are." Outside the room, nurses passed with clipboards and polite smiles. "Look," she said, stepping back. "I didn't sign up for this. You think I want to be plastered all over the news? To be accused of marrying for money?" Grayson tilted his head. "That was never my concern." Sir Hark thumped. "Then what is your concern?" "You'll get too comfortable in the role." She laughed, short, bitter. "Trust me, Mr. Ward. They've never been comfortable in a room with someone who looks at me like a scratch on their car." He didn't flinch. Instead, he turned and walked to the table, picked up a thin document, already signed and notarized, and handed it to her. "This is the clause," he said. "Temporary marriage, no financial entanglements, no inheritance, no publicity. You agree to this, you get out in 3 weeks." If I don't?" He looked her dead in the eyes. "Then, I'll ruin you in ways that never make the news." The threat wasn't loud. That made it worse. But something in Jenna, the part of her that had raised herself, the part that hadn't cried when her father vanished or when she'd lost a child no one knew existed, stood up straighter. She took the document. "I'll sign, but not because I'm scared of you." Grayson nodded once. "Good." There was silence. Then a knock. Esther's nurse peeked in. "She's awake. She's asking for her granddaughter-in-law." Jenna's stomach flipped. Grayson looked at her, and for the first time since they met, his voice softened. "She likes drama," he said. "Just smile and nod." The room Esther Ward lay in looked like a five-star hotel suite dressed in hospital whites. A tray of untouched jello sat by her bed, alongside a Bible, a silk scarf, and a half-knitted shawl. Jenna walked in slowly, heart in her throat. Esther's eyes fluttered open. "There she is," she rasped. "My angel." Jenna tried to smile. "You're looking better." "I'd be looking dead if not for you," Esther whispered, reaching for her hand. Grayson stood in the corner, arms folded, silent. "Did he give you a hard time?" Esther asked. Jenna hesitated. Esther smirked. "Of course he did. He was born grumpy, nearly kicked the doctor after his first breath." Grayson exhaled. "Grandma?" "Shush," Esther said, then turned to Jenna. "Promise me you'll stay, just until I'm discharged, just until he remembers what it means to look someone in the eye and feel something." Jenna's voice caught. "Mrs. Ward, I'm not who you think." "You're kind," Esther said, "and I don't need anything else." She closed her eyes, as if that ended the discussion. Jenna looked at Grayson. He looked away. 3 hours later, Jenna walked out of the hospital into gray Atlanta skies and too much wind. A black car waited at the curb. Grayson stood by it, holding the door open. "Where are we going?" she asked. "My place," he said, "until this blows over." She hesitated. "You think I trust you?" "You don't have to," he said, "but you do have to get in." Jenna's fists clenched at her sides. But she got in. Because she had nowhere else to go. Because part of her, a small, desperate part, didn't want to see that old woman wake up to disappointment. And because something in Grayson's voice, just for a second, didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a man who had been alone for too long. Grayson's penthouse wasn't a home. It was an exhibit. Stooled. Glass, cold marble floors that didn't echo footsteps, they swallowed them. "Your room's down the hall," he said, not looking at her. "We'll have dinner at 7, for the press, not for pleasure." Jenna nodded, then walked the long hallway past minimalist art and untouched shelves. In her room, a designer suitcase had already been delivered, filled with luxury clothes she hadn't picked. Everything fit perfectly. It was suffocating. On the nightstand, she found a note. "You did good today. Esther." Jenna sat on the edge of the bed, the city blinking beneath the windows. And she had no idea who she was anymore. A waitress, a flight attendant reject, a temporary wife. But she knew one thing. She hadn't come here to belong. She came here to keep a promise. Chapter 2, Not the Pilot I Expected. The morning sun painted the penthouse windows in gold, but the light couldn't warm the silence inside. Jenna stood at the counter, barefoot in borrowed silk pajamas, staring down at a bowl of granola that cost more than her rent used to. She hadn't slept. The city outside buzzed with its usual rhythm, but inside Grayson Ward's home, everything was still, polished, pristine, untouched. Like him. She hadn't seen him since last night. No knock on the door, no check-in, just a brief email from his assistant confirming her appearance at today's company tour. Dress modestly, speak minimally, smile if you must. She'd read it 3 times, just to be sure it wasn't a joke. And now she was being driven not to an interview, but to the headquarters of Apex Aviation. Fake or not, the weight of that name settled on her chest like an anchor. Apex Aviation headquarters, Midtown Atlanta. Jenna stepped out of the black sedan and stared up at the mirrored glass building that stretched toward the sky like ambition itself. A receptionist greeted her with a forced smile and a laminated badge. "Jenna Ward. I have a guest do not photograph." She clipped it to her blazer. Inside, everything gleamed, every surface, every line, every whisper of corporate power hummed with precision. A young woman in a navy pencil skirt approached. "Mrs. Ward, I'll be escorting you to the tour floor. The new recruits have just arrived." Recruits? Jenna's heart skipped. Was this the same program she'd applied to? The same one she'd been rejected from twice? She followed the assistant through a maze of hallways until they reached the orientation wing. Beyond the frosted glass doors were rows of clean-cut men and women in navy and gray, seated in perfect posture. They looked like they belonged. She never had. A tall woman stepped to the front of the room, clipboard in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Apex's elite in-flight training program. You've already passed the written qualifications. Today, you meet the man who defines our standard." The doors opened again, and in walked Grayson Ward. If there had been any air in the room, it vanished the second he stepped inside. His stride was purposeful, measured, controlled. He wore the sharp navy uniform of an Apex pilot, tailored to his broad frame, wings pinned to his chest. No tie, no unnecessary flair, just presence. Commanding. Cold. Precise. Jenna nearly forgot to breathe. The others rose to their feet instinctively. "Mr. Ward," the coordinator beamed, "we're honored to have you." He nodded once. They sat. He didn't look at her, not once. She sank into a seat in the back row, wishing her name badge read anything but Ward. He began to speak, not from notes, but from memory. "Flying isn't about elevation," he said. "It's about control. When things go wrong up there, you don't get second chances. You don't negotiate with the wind." And someone asked about emergencies. Another asked about autopilot failure. He answered each question like a surgeon, sharp, technical, unemotional. And then someone asked the one thing Jenna dreaded. "Sir, what's your take on company integrity? Specifically, favoritism?" The air chilled. Grayson paused. Slowly, he turned toward the back of the room. His eyes found hers. And for the first time since the airport, they locked. "I believe in merit," he said, voice low but firm. "In my company, no one receives favor unless they've earned it, not even my wife." The room fell silent. Jenna's pulse thundered in her ears. She stood. "I wasn't supposed to be here," she said before she could stop herself. "I came today as a formality, and I'll leave the same way." Gasp fluttered through the room. But Grayson didn't flinch. He gave her one long, unreadable look, then said, "Dismissed." Not to her. To everyone. Outside the glass doors, Jenna walked fast, her heels echoing on the tile. She didn't care where she was going, only that she needed space. "Mrs. Ward." And she stopped. Grayson's voice was soft now, not icy. She turned. "Was that fun for you, making a public example of me?" He stepped closer. Not too close. "You came into my building," he said, "wearing my name. That puts pressure on everyone here, especially you." "I didn't ask for your name," she snapped. "It was forced on me." His jaw tightened. For a moment he looked tired and... "You shouldn't have come," he said. "I wanted to see what I almost worked for," she whispered, before it all fell apart. Grayson's gaze flickered. "You applied here?" She nodded. "Twice. Didn't make it past the second round. Too nervous. Too ordinary." His voice dipped. "You're not ordinary." She blinked. "What?" "Nothing," he said, clearing his throat. "Just go back to the car. I'll finish here." That night, Jenna didn't come down for dinner. Instead, she stood barefoot on the penthouse balcony, watching the city below shimmer like a million answers she'd never receive. Grayson found her there hours later, coat slung over one shoulder. "I brought you something," he said quietly, handing her a small envelope. And she opened it. Inside was a training program rejection letter, her own name at the top, dated 3 months ago. But someone had scribbled in pen across the bottom. It showed unusual promise. We should reconsider her in the future. It was signed by the program's senior director. She looked up at him. "You pulled this?" Grayson shook his head. "I saw it, this morning, after you walked out." He didn't answer right away. Then, "Because I was wrong." The words were simple. but they felt like winter melting off a rooftop, slow, soft, unexpected. "You're not here because of a ring," he said. "You're here because my grandmother saw something I didn't." Why did she see? He looked at her like he hadn't decided the answer yet. "Someone real," he said. "And in my world, real is rare." Jenna turned her eyes to the lights below. For once, she didn't feel small. Just quiet. Just thin. And maybe for the first time in years, that was enough. Chapter 3. The Girl They Laughed At. Apex Aviation's staff lounge wasn't meant for people like Jenna Cross. Not anymore. She stood in the doorway, the laminated Mrs. Ward badge clipped to her chest like a scarlet letter, while every head in the room turned, not to welcome her, but to dissect her. There were whispers. The person always came with glass walls and rich men. Some tried to smile, but most just watched. Some with curiosity, some with thinly veiled contempt. The kind that says, she didn't earn her seat, she stole it. Rachel, her only friend in the flight academy, met her halfway through the room and leaned in with a practiced grin. "Don't take it personally. Most of them think you bribed your way into Grayson's orbit. Some think you seduced him. The rest? They're just jealous it wasn't them." Jenna tried to smile, but it cracked at the edges. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered. Rachel shrugged. "Nobody asked to be the main character, it just happens." In the corner, by the espresso machine, stood Brielle Dean, Apex's reigning it girl. Former Miss South Carolina. Lead attendant on Apex's luxury fleet. Smart, poised, and absolutely lethal in heels. She tapped her nails against her porcelain coffee cup and watched Jenna with all the warmth of a winter breeze. She said, loud enough for the room to hush, "You're the new Mrs. Ward." Jenna turned slowly. "I guess so." "You guess?" Brielle laughed softly. "Darling, if I'd landed that title, I'd have the date engraved on a bracelet." There were chuckles. Jenna forced herself not to shrink. It wasn't planned. Brielle took a slow sip. "Of course not. Things like that never are. You're just a girl with a sandwich and a dream, right?" Jenna's throat tightened. But the insult wasn't about sandwiches. It was about class. About knowing your place and daring to step outside it. "You know," Brylan continued, circling Jenna like a cat sizing up her prey, "I've worked at Apex for 5 years, perfect attendance, 4 languages, multiple commendations, and still, I'm not invited to Mr. Ward's estate." She leaned in close, her perfume sweet and suffocating. "Yet here you are, on his couch, in his penthouse, wearing his grandmother's ring." Jenna didn't flinch. "Maybe," she said quietly, "that says more about him than it does about me." The lounge went still. Brielle's smile froze just a second too long, and then she laughed again, brittle and sharp. "Adorable," she said, waving Jenna off like a child. "True." Jenna left the lounge early, her breath catching in the elevator like she'd been swimming against current all morning. But the humiliation didn't end there. By the time she reached her desk, a temporary one assigned by Grayson's assistant, 2 interns were already snickering by the copy machine. She was caught in the captain's office again. Bet she thinks she owns the place. She probably doesn't even know how to file an expense report. Jenna closed her laptop without a word and stood. She didn't cry. Not there, not yet. And she just walked. Down the hall. Through the silence. To the room that had started it all. Grayson's corner office. Empty. But the air inside still smelled like leather and quiet authority. And on the far wall, a photo she hadn't noticed before. A black and white frame of a woman young, windswept, her flight helmet tucked under her arm, standing beside an old propeller plane. Esther. Jenna touched the glass gently. Then the door opened behind her. "Why are you doing in here?" It wasn't Grayson. It was Gerald Lang, Apex's vice president, late 50s, a sharp suit and a sharper tongue. "I was just..." Jenna stepped back. He eyed her with mild amusement. Looking for another promotion? Jenna flushed. That's not... Let me give you some advice, he said, walking past her to grab a file from the credenza. This company has run on structure and silence for 20 years. You waltzing in here with a ring and a sob story doesn't change that. I'm not here to change anything. Exactly, he said, so stay out of sight. Paused at the door. Or next time, you'll find your badge deactivated. Then he left. And Jenna stayed. Frozen. And shaking. That night, Grayson came home late. She was already curled on the penthouse sofa, still in the same clothes, watching the lights of Atlanta blur through the windows. Why didn't you tell me? She asked, her voice barely above a breath. He set down his keys slowly. Tell you what? They think I'm a joke. He didn't speak. I think I'm just some girl who got lucky, she whispered, that I slept my way into a legacy, that I don't belong here. He stood across from her, arms crossed. Do you? She looked up, startled. Are you? He asked again, more gently this time. I don't know, she said. I've never belonged anywhere. He nodded slowly. Good, then you understand what it takes to survive. Jenna blinked at him. That's not comforting. I'm not trying to comfort you, he said. I'm trying to prepare you. Why what? What happens when they realize you're not going away? A long silence passed between them. I'm not trying to make a scene, she said softly. I just want to keep my head down. Then do it, he said, but do it with your chin up. He walked toward the hallway, then stopped. Tomorrow, he said over his shoulder, you'll come to the boardroom. Jenna frowned. Why? Because they're going to bring up your presence again. And she stood. Then why am I coming? He turned and looked at her, really looked. And his voice was the softest she'd ever heard it. Because if they're going to talk about you like you're not in the room, you deserve to be in the room. And then he left. And Jenna, standing in the quiet glow of the penthouse, realized something she hadn't dared believe. Grayson Ward wasn't protecting her because he had to. He was protecting her because somewhere between obligation and admiration he'd started seeing her. Not just as a sandwich girl. Not just as a ring on his finger. But as a woman who had quietly refused to break. And the next morning, she would walk into that boardroom. Not as a wife. Not as a joke. But as the girl they laughed at. Who didn't leave. Chapter 4. The CEO's Wife, or the Cleaning Girl. The boardroom at Apex Aviation felt like a courtroom. The ceiling was high, the glass was cold, and every man at the table wore the same shade of expensive gray, not just in their suits, but in their eyes. Jenna stood by the window, her badge clipped straight, her back straighter. Grayson sat at the head of the long table, motionless. And across from him, Gerald Lang, VP of Operations, cleared his throat with a sound like a man about to make trouble. Much as we respect your personal life, Mr. Ward, he began smoothly, we believe the company has a right to protect its image. Grayson didn't blink. You're referring to my wife? There was a beat of silence. Gerald leaned forward. We've received concerns, internal murmurs. Several department leads have voiced confusion over her status. She's my legal spouse, Grayson replied. Gerald said, but she has no formal title here, no corporate record, and yet she has access to restricted floors. She's been seen in the executive lounge. She was found alone in your office. Jenna felt the air shift, like a trap was closing around her. Another board member added, there's even a rumor she's living in the penthouse suite, that she's influencing company decisions. Grayson said nothing. Jenna looked down at the table, all those polished hands folded neatly beside glossy quarterly reports. Not one of them had ever asked her name. She raised her head. My name is Jenna Cross, she said clearly, and I understand the rumors. I didn't apply for this attention, but I also didn't ask to be framed as an intruder. The men looked at one another, uncomfortable. Gerald smiled politely. Of course not. But this is a professional space, and we have standards, uniforms, protocol, vetting. There's concern you were fast-tracked into proximity. Grayson leaned back in his chair. Proximity to me or to the company? Gerald didn't answer. Jenna felt the heat behind her eyes, the old familiar burn that meant tears wanted to come. But she didn't cry. Not here. Not now. Instead, she stepped forward and placed a printed sheet on the table. This is my original flight program application, dated 6 months ago, rejected in round 2. Not because of my skills, because of nerves. And she paused. This, she added, laying a second page on top, is my rejection letter, the one your assistant mailed with no explanation. The board glanced down, frowned. Attached, she continued, voice unwavering, is a handwritten note from your director of personnel, recommending me for future roles. He thought I had potential. So did your senior recruiter. She looked around the room. I'm not a scandal, she said. I'm a second chance. And if that makes you uncomfortable, maybe you're sitting at the wrong table. Grayson's eyes didn't leave her. Gerald cleared his throat again, slightly less confident now. We only meant to clarify your position, Mrs. Ward. I don't need a position, she said softly. I just need space to stand. Grayson rose from his chair. Gentlemen, he said, his voice calm but firm, my wife will continue to be present in this building, not because of a ring, but because she's earned the right to be heard. One of the men murmured, We didn't mean to offend. But Grayson cut him off with a single look. Jenna turned, heels clicking softly on the floor as she walked to the door. But just before she reached it, a voice called out. She's not who you think she is. It was Brielle. She stood just outside the conference room, holding a tablet. Her lipstick was perfect. Her smile wasn't. She's been entering restricted areas, Brian said sweetly. Late nights. Last week security caught her inside the CEO's private server room. A murmur rippled through the board. Jenna's heart stopped. That's a lie, she said. I have proof, Brielle smiled, tapping the screen. Gervain's footage, 2:11 a.m. Sunday. Care to explain? Grayson's eyes narrowed. That footage shouldn't exist. Those cameras were disabled. Brielle blinked. Then how did I get this? She pressed play. But the screen stayed black. No signal, the tablet read. Brielle froze. Then looked up. Too late. Grayson stepped forward, because the footage was planted, and the footage wasn't of my wife. He took the tablet, handed it to security. I want every backup drive reviewed. I want the original files audited, and I want Miss Dean's access badge revoked until further notice. Brielle's mouth opened, then closed. Grayson turned to Jenna. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Not to the board. To her. In front of everyone. I should have stepped in sooner. Jenna didn't speak. She couldn't. Too many years of being dismissed. Too many days of being invisible. Too many mornings of watching others get away with what she never dared to ask for. And now here she was, the girl with the sandwich being defended by the man who once looked at her like a complication. The room emptied. Grayson walked beside her toward the elevator. I didn't expect that from you, he said softly. Expect what? She asked. To hold your ground. She looked up at him. I've been holding ground my whole life, she said. You just never noticed. He said nothing, but something in his eyes changed. Later that night, Jenna sat on the penthouse balcony, hair damp from a shower, wrapped in an old sweatshirt she'd stuffed at the bottom of her suitcase weeks ago. Grayson came out quietly. No tie, no defenses. Just him? He stood beside her. You made them listen. She nodded, eyes on the skyline. And you made Brielle furious, he added, almost amused. Jenna smiled faintly. That part was a bonus. He turned toward her. You don't have to keep proving yourself to them, he said. I do, she whispered. But not because of them. Grayson waited. I have to prove it to myself. Silence. Then he reached into his pocket and handed her. Inside was a photo, worn at the corners, of a girl standing on a flight ramp, wind in her hair, pointing up at the sky. Jenna stared. Was me, Grayson said quietly. 12 years ago, she asked me what I wanted to be. Who? He smiled. A grandmother. Jenna held the photo like a prayer. She said, Grayson, don't just fly the plane, learn what makes it rise. His voice caught, and she gave me purpose. He reminded me of that. Jenna looked at him, and for the first time since they met, she saw it. Not the CEO. Not the cold suit. The boy in the photo, older now, still chasing the sky. You're not easy to like, she said softly. He laughed. No, I'm not. Why, you're starting to feel real. His smile faded, but his eyes didn't. Funny, he said. That's exactly how I feel about you. They stood there together, saying nothing more. And in the quiet, Jenna knew the truth. She wasn't the cleaning girl, and she wasn't the CEO's mistake. She was the woman who walked into a world that didn't want her, and stayed. Chapter 5. The first time he said my name. There was something sacred about silence at 3:00 IA. No phones buzzing, no headlines screaming, no boardroom whispers. Just the quiet hum of the city sleeping beneath a sky full of stars no one had time to look at. Jenna stood barefoot on the cold floor of Grayson Ward's penthouse kitchen, her hair a messy braid falling over one shoulder, a mug of tea warming her hands. She couldn't sleep. Not after the boardroom. Not after Brielle. Not after Grayson had looked her in the eyes and said, I should have stepped in sooner. Because that wasn't strategy. It was regret. Unreal, unfiltered, unexpected. Behind her, the elevator chimed softly. And she turned. Grayson. No tie, no suit, just gray sweatpants, a black t-shirt, and an exhaustion that made him look almost human. I didn't expect you to be awake, he said, his voice rough with sleep. Jenna shrugged. I never really sleep on nights like this. Like what? The world starts to shift, and you're not sure which version of yourself you're waking up as. He walked to the fridge, pulled out a bottle of water. That sounds complicated. It is. He took a sip and leaned against the counter across from her. I wasn't lying in that room, he said. She blinked. About what? About you not needing a position to deserve respect. Her throat tightened. He set the bottle down and looked at her. Really looked. You were never supposed to be here, Jenna. She froze. It was the first time he'd said her name. Not Mrs. Ward. Not you. Not the girl from the airport. And it was so quiet, so careful, like the word itself had to be handled gently or it might break. I know I wasn't, she whispered. Why, I'm glad you are, he said. Silence stretched between them. Not awkward, not forced, just full. Did you ever wish, she said softly, that someone could see the version of you that existed before success, before status, before people stopped calling you by your first name? He smiled, barely. That version of me wasn't very impressive. I bet he was real, though. She stepped to the window and leaned her forehead against the glass, the city lights blinking below. Grayson joined her. I used to fly because it felt like freedom, he said. Now it just feels like noise. Jenna turned her head. Then why do you still do it? He looked down. Because I don't know what else I'd be if I stopped. And there it was. The truth beneath the title. The fear behind the suit. You don't have to be anything but human, she said quietly. I forgot how, he replied. She looked at him, at the lines near his eyes, the tired set of his shoulders, the way his voice softened when no one else was listening. You said my name, she murmured. He blinked. Yes. I wouldn't said it like that in a long time. He studied her face. Like what? Like it mattered. Something flickered in his expression. I'll say it again if you want, he said, and it wasn't flirtation, it was a peace offering. She smiled. Not the polite kind, not the press-ready kind, the kind she used to have before the world tried to shape her into something quieter. Then, tell me something no one knows. Grayson raised an eyebrow. About me? He hesitated. Then, I was afraid of turbulence for the first 3 years of my flying career. Jenna blinked. You? The man who lectures on poise and control? I used to count backwards from 100 every time the plane jolted. Once, I counted 3 full sets before we landed. She laughed, light and real. I knew. She looked at him. I sing in the shower, but only country songs. He smiled. Seriously? She nodded. Reba, Faith Hill, once, Dolly Parton, don't tell the board. And her secret safe. They stood like that for a while, in the hush of a world that didn't know what to make of them. Then his phone buzzed on the counter. He picked it up, glanced at the screen, then frowned. Why is it? She asked. He turned the phone so she could see. A headline. Break. Mrs. Ward accused of leaking Apex financials. Internal sabotage suspected. Jenna's stomach dropped. This isn't from inside the company, Grayson said, already scrolling through emails. Someone on the outside, a tabloid, picked it up. He moved fast, texting his legal team, forwarding the headline to his PR manager. Jenna backed away. They're going to blame me. I won't, he said firmly. They will. They always do. He looked up. Do you trust me? I don't know, she said honestly, but I want to. He stepped closer. Then he reached out, gently touched her hand. No matter what they print, he said, I know who you are. Do you? She whispered. He nodded. You're the girl who held my grandmother's hand without asking for anything in return. Jenna's voice cracked. And you're the man who didn't smile until someone finally reminded him how. They stood that way, suspended in the moment, while the world outside tried to tear them down. And when she finally turned away, heading for the guest room, he called out, Jenna? And she stopped. You asked earlier, he said, voice low, what I'd be if I stopped flying. She turned, waiting. I think maybe I'd be yours. She didn't say anything, just looked at him, and closed the door behind her, heart pounding, hands trembling, knowing full well that she was falling for a man she still barely understood, but who had, at last, said her name like it meant something. Chapter 6. The Woman in the Necklace. There were rumors again, not whispered this time, louder, sharper. They started in the Apex elevators, slipped through the marble halls, and landed with weight in the staff lounge like broken glass no one wanted to sweep up. Grayson Ward's first love is back. She's been seen boarding his jet in Paris, and she's wearing the ocean's heart. And just like that, every pair of eyes that had started to soften toward Jenna went cold again. Because in their world, love wasn't about history, it was about hierarchy. And the ocean's heart necklace? That was history, carved into diamonds. Grayson didn't mention it when he left for New York that morning. He just pressed a hand gently to Jenna's lower back as she poured her tea. I'll be back by midnight, he said. Anything important? She asked. I paused. Just a meeting. No kiss, no lie, but not the whole truth either. She nodded. Safe flight? He hesitated, like he wanted to say something more. But he didn't. We walked out the door, polished, unreadable, leaving Jenna in the kitchen with nothing but the memory of his voice and the echo of silence where trust was supposed to live. That night, Apex held a black-tie charity gala in its downtown atrium, an event Jenna hadn't planned to attend. She wasn't invited. Not officially. But Esther called that morning. "We'll need you there," she said, "even if he doesn't know it." "Are you sure?" Jenna asked, staring at the plain black dress she hadn't worn since her cousin's wedding. "I didn't fake a heart attack just to let another woman rewrite your story," Esther said. "Wear something that makes you feel like you survived something. Because you have." The gala was a garden of glass and light champagne flutes, glittering gowns, and smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. Jenna stepped inside and instantly felt the shift. People turned. Some recognized her from the tabloids, others from the elevator, but most just looked at her and whispered the same thing. "To the girl, and that's the necklace." Because across the room, under a chandelier that looked like it belonged in a French cathedral, stood a woman in sapphire silk. And on her neck was the ocean's heart, a diamond that shimmered like midnight waves. It sparkled even brighter than the woman wearing it, and that was saying something. But she was breathtaking, elegant, not a hair out of place. Little Brielle Dean. But rebranded, reborn, and reintroduced. To the press, she was now the longtime family friend. To the public, Grayson Ward's intended. And to Jenna, she was the echo of every fear she hadn't dared to speak. "Who let the waitress in?" The words were soft, velvet-wrapped. But when Jenna turned, there she was. Evil British accent. Brielle, drink in hand, smile carved sharp. "I'm not here to fight," Jenna said. "Good," Brielle replied. "You'd lose." She took a step closer. The necklace caught the light. You know where this came from?" she asked, brushing a manicured nail along the diamond. "An auction," Jenna said. "Paris," Brielle corrected. 2 million, private bid. The media says Grayson bought it for his future wife." She leaned in. "I know I'm wearing it." Jenna's chest ached. "It doesn't mean what you think it does." Brielle smiled. "Oh honey, in our world, it means everything." Then she turned just as Grayson entered through the side doors. He was in formal wear, black tux, no tie. But his eyes? They didn't scan the crowd. They searched. And when they found Jenna standing small and alone by the empty champagne bar, something in him shifted. He didn't look at Brielle. Not once. He walked straight to Jenna. "Hi," he said, voice quiet. "Hi," she answered, even quieter. "You look." He stopped himself. Jenna smiled sadly. "Don't worry, I know what I look like." He shook his head. "No, I was going to say, you look like you belong here." She stared at him. "Do I?" Grayson looked down. Then before she could turn, he gently reached for her hand and placed something in her palm. A folded receipt. Handwritten. Private auction. Ocean's Heart. To Jenna Ward. Recipient. On behalf of Esther Ward. For the woman who didn't ask for diamonds but gave everything that mattered. Jenna looked up, stunned. "You bought it? For me?" He nodded. "But I gave it to the wrong woman." Jenna whispered. "Why?" "Because I was afraid," he said, "that if I gave it to the one who mattered, it wouldn't be enough." Tears stung her eyes. And then, over the loudspeaker, a voice echoed. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our keynote speaker, Mr. Grayson Ward." He didn't let go of her hand. He leaned in and said quietly, "Come with me." "With the stage?" She shook her head. I can't." Olivia said. He said. The lights were hot. The ballroom silent. Grayson stood at the podium, hand resting lightly at the small of Jenna's back. "This company," he began, "was built on structure, on rules, on performance." I paused. "I forgot something. Something my grandmother tried to teach me, something this woman reminded me of." He turned slightly, meeting Jenna's eyes. Kindness is not a weakness. That love, the quiet, unpolished kind, is not a liability." He gestured toward her. "You've read about her, You've judged her, but you haven't seen her." He took a breath. "See her now. Not as my wife, not as a headline, but as the girl who gave her last sandwich to a stranger and changed everything." There were murmurs and silence. Then, one by one, hands clapped. Slow, tentative, then louder, and louder still, till the room roared. But Jenna didn't hear any of it. She was looking at him, and for the first time, he was already looking back, not at the necklace, not at the image, but at her. Just her. Chapter 7. The drawer only I could open. The office was dark when she entered. Grayson had left for a morning board meeting in D.C., and the staff was preoccupied with damage control from the betrayal rumors, which had finally, mercifully begun to fade. For once, Jenna could walk the marble floors of Apex Aviation without whispers trailing behind her like static. But she wasn't here to be seen. She was here to look for the truth, because something wasn't adding up. This necklace, the speech, the sudden clarity. And the thing Grayson didn't say the night of the gala when he held her hand but stopped short of telling her what she most needed to hear. Jenna stepped into his private office. The heavy door closed behind her with a soft thud. The room smelled like cedar and old books. One wall was glass. The other three were shelves and mahogany. Everything was too tidy, too cold, too deliberate, except for the drawer. The one he always locked. The one she'd seen him pause over once, late at night, when he thought she wasn't watching. She knelt in front of it. No key, just a digital lock pad. She hesitated, then typed in 4 numbers. Her birth date, 2294. A soft click. The drawer slid open. Her heart stopped. Inside were 3 things. A small velvet pouch, a manila folder, and a photograph. She lifted the photo first. It was a candid taken at the airport the day she met Esther. Jenna was bent over, offering the old woman half of her sandwich, her face half shored by sunlight through the terminal glass. It wasn't a press photo, it wasn't staged. It's personal. Once one had zoomed in, cropped it, printed it. Beneath the photo, in inked handwriting she instantly recognized. She sees people, even when no one sees her. Historian? Jenna's fingers trembled. She picked up the folder next. Inside, notes from an internal Apex review, her original application file, a sticky note attached. Quiet, underprepared, but emotionally intelligent. Unteachable instinct. There was another handwriting style next to it. Grayson, bring her back when the time is right. The final item, the velvet pouch, held a ring. A second ring. Delicate, simple, different from the heirloom Esther had given her. Inside the band was an engraving. A girl who never asked to be chosen, but chose anyway. Jenna sat back on her heels. She hadn't come here to cry, but now she was shaking. Because this wasn't just a drawer. This was a secret shrine. To her. Behind her, the door opened. Jenna? His voice. Grayson? And she froze. He stepped inside, and for the first time since she met him, he looked unsure. "Why are you in here?" he asked carefully. And she stood slowly, the folder still in her hands. "You locked it," she said. "I had to." He met her gaze. "Because if I showed you what was in there too soon, you would have run." Jenna stared. "So you've known, since the beginning?" "I didn't know I felt it," he said. "Not at first." "Then why keep this?" He swallowed. "Because every time I tried to forget you, I came back to that photo, to what she wrote, to what I saw in your eyes." She held up the ring. "Were you ever going to give this to me?" He didn't answer. "You can't keep me at a distance," she whispered, "and still expect me to believe you care." "I didn't know how to do both," he admitted. "Well," she said softly, "now you don't have to." She walked past him, heart pounding, and stopped just short of the door. "I opened the drawer," she said, "because I needed proof that I mattered to you." "Where did you find it?" he asked, voice low. She looked over her shoulder, and this time, she didn't smile. "I found more than that." Then she left him standing there. Alone. That night, Jenna didn't return to the penthouse. She stayed at a small boutique hotel near Piedmont Park, windows open, the sound of rain painting stories against the glass. She didn't answer his text. Didn't respond to the knock on her door at midnight. Because what she needed wasn't an apology. It was time to remember who she was before she ever wore his ring, before she stood on that gala stage, before she ever felt seen. She needed to know that even without Grayson Ward, she could still open locked doors. At 3:03 OI in Lincoln, a message lit up her phone. "I'm Grayson Ward. You opened the drawer. I should have expected that. But for what it's worth, I'm glad you did. Because now I have nothing left to hide." And beneath it, a photo. Same one from the drawer. But this time, cropped differently. This time, she wasn't just feeding Esther. Grayson was in the background, standing at a distance watching her. And smiling. Just a little. Just enough. Jenna stared at the photo for a long time. Then she turned out the lights, pulled the blanket tighter over her. Maybe he never looked away. Chapter 8. He called me his wife. The boardroom was colder than usual. The air conditioning buzzed low in the ceiling, and the morning light through the high-rise windows turned every polished surface into steel. Jenna sat quietly near the back. Not as a guest. Not as a distraction. Just present. She'd returned to Apex that morning without announcement, walked past the front desk without a badge, no fanfare, no press. She wore a navy blouse and flats, no jewelry, no lipstick. The ring from Esther sat in her pocket, not on her finger. She didn't know what she was here to prove. Only that she couldn't stay away from the fight she was already part of. At the table, the board spoke in vague terms. Misconduct. Breach of protocol. But none of them said her name. Not until Gerald Lang cleared his throat and turned toward Grayson. "There's been increasing concern over the stability of Apex executive image," he said, "particularly regarding recent entanglements." Grayson didn't move. Gerald continued, "We're simply asking for clarity, for boundaries. If personal relationships interfere with operations..." "That's enough," Grayson said quietly. Gerald raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "I said that's enough." Grayson stood slowly. "You want clarity?" The room tensed. "Her name is Jenna Ward," he said, voice steady. "She is my wife. She's not a liability. She's not a scandal. She's the reason I remember why I started this company in the first place." Murmurs broke across the room like a wave. Grayson stepped away from the table. "She reminded me that this company was built on trust. On people. Not press releases." Gerald scoffed. "Mr. Ward, with all due respect, your marriage is none of your business," Grayson cut in. "But since you've made it so, yes, it's real. Yes, I signed that certificate. And no, I don't regret it." His eyes scanned the room. "In fact," he added, "it's the only contract in this building I signed without reading the fine print. And I'd do it again." Jenna's breath caught in her throat. He turned to face her, in front of everyone. "I've failed you," he said softly, not caring who was listening now. "I made you invisible, and..." He reached into his pocket and took out the second ring, the one from the drawer. The one meant for her. And in front of a room full of men who had only ever measured worth in numbers and headlines, he walked to her, knelt slightly and placed the ring in her hand. "I never gave you this," he whispered, "because I didn't think I deserved to." "I still don't," he added, "but I'm asking anyway." Jenna stared at the ring. Not flashy, not royal, Just real. Her fingers curled around it slowly. And without speaking, she nodded. Grayson turned back to the board. "This conversation's over," he said. "We'll move forward with or without your approval, but we won't move backward." Then he took Jenna's hand. Not behind closed doors. Not in shadows. In the open. Where everyone could see. And where no one could mistake what she was, to him. Wife. And more than that. The anchor. The news broke in under an hour. Grainy cell phone footage. A headline that read, "CEO declares love in boardroom standoff, publicly defends wife in stunning turn." By noon, it was trending. By 2, Jenna was in the break room when a young intern, the same one who once laughed about her resume, approached her with wide eyes and a quiet voice. "I'm sorry," the intern said, for how we treated you." Jenna didn't gloat. She didn't correct her. She just nodded. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. Because redemption was sweeter when it wasn't asked for. Only earned. That evening, Grayson met her outside the building. No suit, no walls. Just him. He held out his hand. "Come with me." "Where?" He smiled. "Somewhere we don't have to explain ourselves." She took his hand. And for the first time, didn't look over her shoulder. They drove in silence for a while, windows down, the Georgia air warm and soft. Then he pulled into a small airfield. Jenna stared. "What are we doing here?" He parked beside a hangar. Opened her door. Led her inside. There, under a string of old lights, sat a single-engine plane. And next to it, 2 chairs. A picnic basket. And her flight training acceptance letter printed fresh pinned to the propeller. Her breath hitched. "You said once," he murmured, "you didn't belong anywhere." She nodded. He stepped closer. "You do now." Jenna blinked fast. "You did all this?" He smiled. "Only half. Half. The part that remembered your name." He took her hands. "You're not the girl from the airport, Jenna. You're the reason I landed." Tears slipped down her cheeks. And she let them. Because this time, there was no one to hide from. He called her his wife. But more importantly, he saw her. Chapter 9. The Scandal I Didn't Create. The headlines didn't stop. Not even after the boardroom. Not even after Grayson publicly declared her as his wife. They just changed tone. From nobody to Apex's queen, Jenna Ward's meteoric rise, or strategic move. Insider accuses CEO's wife of leaking financial data for personal gain. Jenna Ward, modern Cinderella or corporate saboteur. Each article came with a carefully selected photo. Her head turned slightly. But the captions? They wrote her into a villain. And this time, the knives weren't hidden. They were aimed. Grayson's PR team went into lockdown mode. Jenna was pulled from Apex's official website. Public events were quietly canceled. And behind closed doors, even some of the staff began to whisper again. This wasn't gossip. It was war. "I didn't leak anything," Jenna said, pacing the penthouse, her voice low but sharp. "I wouldn't even know how." Grayson stood at the kitchen island, scrolling through flagged documents. "I know." "Then why does it feel like no one else does?" "Because people don't need facts to believe a story. Just friction." She stopped. "So what? I wait this out while the world crucifies me?" He looked up, tired but certain. "No, we fight back." The security team traced the leak to a company drive. A single folder copied at 2:14 a.m. 3 weeks ago, one day before the first tabloid leak. The access log was clean. Too clean. "Someone covered their tracks," said Marcus, Apex's head of digital security. "It was either someone inside or someone with help." Jenna sat across from him, arms folded. There was one person with access to that drive outside of Grayson. Marcus hesitated. Who? He looked directly at Jenna. You. At the moment shattered. Everything Grayson had, Dawn, the speech, the ring, the late-night truths, they all trembled on edge. I didn't touch your server, Jenna whispered. I know, Grayson said. I know that. But his voice, it had changed. Like he believed her, but was scared he might be wrong. That night, Jenna didn't eat, didn't sleep. She stood at the window and watched the world below move without her. And she thought of the drawer, of the ring, of the photo Grayson kept like a secret prayer. But even love, when shadowed by doubt, starts to feel like surveillance. But she needed air. So she walked hood up, shoes silent, through midtown streets, soaked with early spring rain. She walked until her lungs hurt, until her breath felt like her own again, until a shadow stepped out in front of her. Didn't expect to see you here, Jenna. And she stopped. No Brielle. In jeans, hair pulled back, no camera crew. Just her. Just Venom. What do you want? Jenna asked quietly. Brielle shrugged. To see the empire you built on sympathy crumble. Jenna stared. You framed me. Brielle didn't deny it. I gave the tabloids just enough, she said. Nothing illegal, just believable. You won't get away with this. I already have, Brielle smiled. Because deep down, people like their heroines messy. Easier to throw stones when they think she asked for it. Jenna's voice shook. I never wanted any of this. Brielle said, but you didn't say no either. And with that, she disappeared into the rain. Jenna returned to the penthouse, soaked to the bone. Grayson was waiting. You were gone 3 hours, he said. I needed to walk. His jaw tightened. And you didn't think to tell me? I'm not one of your pilots, she snapped. You don't own my whereabouts. He stared at her, hurt flashing, then fading. I talked to Esther tonight, he said after. Jenna exhaled slowly. What did she say? When you walk away from someone, he said, you don't always come back. She didn't answer. So he added, don't make me learn that the hard way. Jenna turned away, the rain still drying on her skin. I didn't create the scandal, Grayson, she whispered, but I'm living it. The next morning, security found the missing file. Planted in a duplicate folder on an admin's private laptop, traced back to Brielle's assistant. It was enough to clear Jenna. Not in the tabloids, but legally. That night, Grayson stood at the press podium, cameras flashing, reporters shouting, and said the words that should have come weeks earlier. My wife did nothing wrong. She was a casualty of my silence. And I won't be silent anymore. Behind the scenes, Jenna watched the feed alone. And she didn't cry. She didn't smile. Olivia said, "Oh, alone?" She just stood there, one hand holding the velvet pouch from the drawer, the other holding the ring inside. Because even innocence doesn't erase impact. Even love, when bruised, needs time to heal. And even a man with all the power in the world has to earn the right to stand beside a woman who kept her head when the world tried to take it from her. Chapter 10. The Day He Let Me Fly. The hangar was silent, except for the soft whir of wind through the rafters. Grayson stood by the nose of the aircraft, hands in the pockets of his flight jacket, eyes fixed on the single prop plane he hadn't touched in months. Jenna walked in quietly, her boots clicking against the concrete. She didn't speak. Not yet. He didn't turn to greet her, just tilted his head slightly, as if her presence was a gravity he'd already felt. "It's yours today," he said softly. She frowned. "The plane?" He nodded. "You're flying it." Her breath caught. "I'm not certified." "You are," he said, pulling a folded paper from his jacket. "Last week. Top of your class. I just didn't tell you yet." She stared at the paper, her name in bold at the top, signed by the FAA examiner. "You knew I passed?" I've been tracking your hours since your second lesson. She took the certificate in both hands. It felt heavier than she expected, like a badge, like a memory. Now? She asked. Because everything I built, he said, was about control, and I used it to keep you safe. To keep you near. His voice cracked slightly. Why never gave you wings? Jenna looked at the plane, then at him. And for the first time since the headlines, since the accusations, since the doubt in his voice, she still hadn't forgotten. She saw no fear in his face, only peace. I'll need a co-pilot, she said. His lips lifted. I thought you'd say that. They soared over the Georgia pines with the sun brushing gold across the tips of the trees. Jenna's fingers were steady on the controls. Grayson sat beside her in the passenger seat, arms folded, letting her take the sky. He didn't coach, didn't correct. He trusted. Below them, the city blurred, a soft gray pulse against the blue. I never told you what scared me most, she said quietly. He looked at her. She kept her eyes on the horizon. It wasn't the press, or Brielle, or the boardroom. Then what? She inhaled. It was becoming someone I didn't recognize, someone who disappeared behind your name. He was quiet. I loved you, she said. I think I still do, but I needed to know I could love myself first. Grayson's voice was soft, and now? She turned toward him, the headset gently compressing her braid. Tonight we know, she said, because you let go. He reached for her hand between them, just briefly, and gave it a light squeeze. Jenna, he said. You didn't just fly this plane. She smiled faintly. What did I do? You reminded me what the sky was for. They landed just before dusk. The wind was softer now. Back inside the hangar, Grayson leaned against the hood of her car while she wiped down the dashboard and logged her final flight report. When she approached, he held out a small box. No velvet this time. No gold. Just cardboard, hand-folded. She opened it. Inside was the first ring, the one Esther had slipped onto her hand in the hospital, the one she hadn't worn in weeks. Next to it, a delicate chain. It's not for your finger anymore, he said. I want you to wear it however you choose. Jenna picked it up and slipped the ring onto the chain, fastened it around her neck. The metal rested just above her heartbeat. I'm not asking you to come home, he said, not unless you're ready. She nodded slowly, then stepped forward and kissed his cheek. A promise. Not an ending. Just a beginning that didn't need to be rushed. I'll meet you at the sky, she whispered. And then she walked away, head high, heart steady, the weight of the ring finally light against her chest. The woman he watched first. They never told the press when they started over. There was no headline, no statement, no need. It happened quietly, the way most real things do. One Sunday morning, Grayson showed up at the little flight school where Jenna now taught part-time. He sat in the back row of the hangar classroom, silent, dressed in denim and humility. When the class ended, he stayed seated until the last student left. Then he stood. She didn't say anything. He didn't either. He just reached out, not to take her hand this time, but to offer it. And she placed hers in his, without needing to ask if the world was watching. Because it wasn't. Because finally, it didn't matter. They moved back into the penthouse 6 months later, but made it theirs, not his. The photos changed. The cold glass softened. Esther's ring stayed around Jenna's neck. And one day, when no one was looking, Grayson placed the other ring back on her finger, slow and certain. No cameras. No board. The two of them, sitting on a rooftop bench above the city they both had to survive to appreciate. They didn't call it a second marriage. They called it a beginning, because that's what real love is. Not perfect. Not polished. earned through hard conversations, quiet sacrifices, and the courage to stay when it would have been easier to leave. Years later, at a small dinner celebrating Apex's Community Scholarship Fund, someone introduced Jenna as CEO's wife, who started as just a girl with a sandwich. Jenna smiled and corrected them. I started as the girl who saw someone who needed kindness and didn't look away. In a world that teaches us to chase titles and applause, remember the quiet girl who gave without asking. The woman who walked through fire and never let it harden her. And the man who had everything, but only learned how to land when he followed her into the storm. Because love, the kind that lasts, isn't built in spotlight. It's built in small rooms, in private trust, and holding a hand long after the world lets go. If you've ever felt unseen, if you've ever been judged for your beginnings, if you've ever given something small that turned out to be everything, then you are the woman this story was written for. And if it moved you, even just a little, tell someone what kindness once did for you, or what you hope love still can. We're listening, and so is someone who needs to know they matter too.